when you're setting the text to music, there are just moments which sort of, some words which seem to kind of flow, go with the music, and some that just sort of don't. And when they don't, you have to think: is it me? Or is it the words? And it's not often that easy to put your finger on why something does or doesn't go in to music. Actually, I just simply leave it and either take it out or change it to try and change it to something else. I mean, I think my librettist, so to speak, probably had to not get too attached to what they'd written, because I mean there was that marvelous line you put in the Maid's aria. I always remember this one because I just loved it. So it was she's the aria where she says fancy being rich, and there was a line that's she doesn't look happy, she looks rich. My sister Joyce, who lives in Bromley, not the one who went to Canada, said that. I wanted to say it so much, but it just couldn't be done. There was no music for that line. So unfortunately, but I remembered it 20 years. So I mean, yeah, and actually in Buñuel, I mean, he builds the characters from the merest, very sparingly with the words. There's very few details, but they're all very telling. But famously, the film, you can easily get confused. Firstly, it's in black and white, and everyone has the same haircuts, and but it's much easier for me because it's in colour, and also wigs and music can really differentiate characters more.
And of course, the Exterminating Angel. I mean, I think it's the longest running project. I think 2001 is the first tremors of hearing about it, and now we're here.
Yes.
And so I think I read in the program that you went through 6 drafts or something with
the libretto. Yes, we did something like that.
What can you say about that process? I mean,
I think that something happened there that also happened with the music, that one had to really throw out a huge net in a way to catch the fish that one was actually going to use. And I think the film is so economical, and one of the problems was it was hard to sort of hear the music in it. I mean, there were very few moments when there was enough. There weren't sort of quite enough words sometimes to make an operatic moment or an aria. The lines were very dry. Mm-hmm. So one of the 6 drafts was one which was hugely expanded. I put in lots of sort of flowery things and borrowed from other Buñuel sources, and obviously there are 2 poems by other people which I've still are in there. So that was one. But then actually the final draft, a lot of it sort of suddenly went. I mean, it suddenly went like that. It sort of very much sucked itself in and lost a lot of material. And then I think I sort of needed to add a lot of things to get into it. And as people would say, I mean, I had Tom's and my libretto here, as it were, on one stand. Then I had a academic, completely literal translation there of the screenplay. Then I had a sort of terrible translation that was published by somebody in America, with all sorts of weird mistakes.
Is it because they were American that it was terrible?
No, it was just very inaccurate, actually. And then I had the film, the Spanish. If I knew it, that's where I found this word abulia. Actually, it's not in the subtitles or anything like that. And the American translation said bulimia, so that's how bad it was. Yeah.
Say no more.
Yeah, not quite the right thing. So, and then I realised sometimes, actually, they're just saying the same thing twice, and they just need to say it once. So the whole thing suddenly, again, just lost a lot of weight, as it were, at the last minute. I did a whole draft of the piece, of the music. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was, as I say, a sort of enormous net, very loose, and at least a half of it ended up in the bin, sort of thing, or some not in the bin. It's not quite the right expression.
Yeah.
But it
No. I mean, it's interesting to talk about the compression of a film, which is actually itself, for me, one of the most interesting things was that the film literally repeats, which you can do with mechanical
yes.
reproduction. You can actually take the people arriving and
Yes.
run the same.
I think that's what he does, isn't
film
it?
again.
Yes, it's the same film. Yeah.
But you decided to sort of everything
Yeah.
was developing.
I did, because I feel that with music there's never repeats really, because you'll be older or more hungry or something the second time something is played. The circumstances will have changed, something will have changed. So, and I think it's perhaps a metaphor or something for what one was doing with music to the film. That to me, seeing them enter the house twice, yes, it's the same film, but the feeling is completely different. And the music is obviously close. I mean, it's sort of the same music, but everything is compressed and pushed to a further degree. Somebody said, a French-speaking friend of mine said it was the mineur, version of, they come on in majeur, and it's something like that. I mean, I like that because it's kind of not literally right, but it's very good anyway. And then I think somehow that it was as though one was turning that material more and more, and it's like it becomes like a kaleidoscopic thing that you start to see things that perhaps aren't really visible. You know what I mean? So by the time
Sort of
they
like the staging, where it's just kind of
yes,
turning
that's
a little
right.
bit.
So by the time they actually walk in for the second time, and there's that orchestral music, the feeling is that really they have left a reality behind, and it's possibly resolved completely. As they go into the house, something has happened, and the film is completely dry, but and the dryness is incredible. I find it incredibly exciting. I always watch that scene with a great grin on my face, because it's just so fantastically, outrageous to have this thing of them going up the stairs and then coming through the door again. It's just marvelous. But
Yes, I always think there's something wrong with my print or something. that
yeah,
I've got
no, it's
the back
fantastic.
copy.
It's just a brilliant thing, and like nobody else would do something like that, I think. And but so the music has, I think there's some of this kind of tingling response that I have when I see the film. So that's you can apply that to a lot of things in the way that the music appeared. My response to things in the film.
The other thing that I love about that moment in both the film and the opera is the Encantado, right? The
Yes.
Enchanted to meet you.
Well, at first there were lots of, Signor Rock, mate, delighted to meet you. Oh, how nice to see you. All this, and I thought, I just need one word really for this. It's just much easier to do it that way, and that was the obvious word.
I guess what I'm interested to hear more about is, obviously all of your operas are written in English, but of course you've said, your last big work was Totin, this huge German, and then you have Brahms and of course America as well, and I'm wondering if you can talk at all about that process of first of all choosing English, maybe it chose you, or
that's very, the thing is, I would say there's English and there's English and there's obviously English, as it were. It's not, I don't think I would describe any of my operas, since we're talking about them, as vernacular English or kind of conversational English.
Right.
Really. I don't know, but Philip's language is very, he found this sort of heightened, I don't know, slightly at a sort of angle to what, perhaps, actually, I think, in fact, what I understand is doing is really listening to what people actually say rather than what you think they say, and you get this a very interesting effect, some quite startling, sort of almost, I don't know, and then obviously the Shakespeare, Meredith really made a translation into some sense of it, right. of the Shakespeare, just as you might say, if we'd been Italians, we would translate it into Italian. I don't know, that's a whole, but so it's obviously, again, there's a stylistic form of English in it. and it's not at all conversational in a way. And in this one, I don't know what it is. It's very odd, Buñuel's language. I don't know how to describe it, but obviously there are
Terse, I guess.
terse. That's good. Yes, there are many locutions that they have in it, which are really pretty much are Spanish. And I translated. Well, that sounds very grand, but I used a translation by somebody else from the Hebrew for the over the sea part. And I did my own sort of translation from Hebrew and from many different translations of the Zionides thing at the end, which is very, very long, actually, the original text. It's endless. It's a huge, amazing rant. Yes. Okay. And I just took, I'm ashamed to say, I simply took the bits that I thought that I needed for this thing. Sorry, Yehuda Halevi, if you're listening. So.
I mean, in terms of this kind of, well, we're on the topic of translation. I think that one of the other things that's interesting to me is not just how the language transforms in the operas, and I think you're right that the Tempest is a sort of a degree that's different from the other two, probably, but that each of these operas also has associated works with it, right? So you've got the concert paraphrase on Powder Her Face, and you've got the court studies and the scenes.
I mean, with the case of Powder Her Face, that was because it was written for such a tiny theatre. Almeida, it was even smaller than it is now. I feel, maybe, and this very fragile sort of orchestration with the single strings, and it's also high risk writing. If one person quite understandably gets lost, the music will just vanish. Mm-hmm. So over the years I've kind of it's actually slightly the result of going to places and not being able to hear the orchestra, then I've wanted to hear that music more clearly. So but also it's slightly a kind of fountain of youth for me, that piece, because it was written actually in retrospect very quickly and very instinctively, and so I find it quite I don't know quite how to describe it. It's sort of very useful thing in the kitchen, if you like, that you kind of keep going back to and using all the time. Court Studies was a completely perverse thing to do because it was all the sort of Cinderella bits of the Tempest. I mean, it's probably all Cinderella bits, but those particular bits were actually the trickiest for me, because it was they were sort of at an angle to my music somehow, and that was also done under quite difficult circumstances, quite late, and I wanted to sort of get more of a handle on what this odd sort of counterpoint, whatever the word is, I was doing actually, how it worked or something.
You mean the counterpoint of the action of the
No, the counterpoint as in
within.
Counterpoint. Yes, mm-hmm. Yes. I mean, I was trying to do something using music that isn't really contrapuntal, which is couperin. But I sort of looking at it and thinking it actually is in a sort of hidden way. I had this sort of sense of it. So, mm-hmm. And it was a sort of analytical thing to do, the court studies.
Truly a study.
Yes, I suppose so.
Yeah.
I was just thinking about something, but go back to your question about the language. Of course, the opera last night, Exterminating Angel, is not obviously set in England. I mean, it's very much not English in any way, Mm-hmm. But I think Buñuel wanted it. He would have loved to do it in London, he said, because that would be the right kind of. He saw London as being a place, as a grand place, mm-hmm. And so it's got that kind of relation to it. It's not a lot of English people, so I don't think of it as an English opera. Yeah. I mean, what does that mean?
I mean just that it's set in.
Yeah. I mean, actually, this is a marvelous thing. Yes, he did, because he thought that things like the kind of table, what are they called? Those things, civil things that you put on the table. Those things.
Like the accoutrements. And
yes. Epern, he could have these really kind of very formal things if he was doing it in England. So there was that thing of the napkin, that they only had one napkin in Mexico. So when he was filming, one proper linen napkin. so that when they were filming that scene, they had to pass it under the table to each other.
So each person.
Yes, yes. But it's not really. I hope I'm right in saying. Anyway, I feel that no one really agrees, for sure, whether it's set in Madrid or in Mexico.
I mean, there's so much ambiguity about it.
Yeah,
right.
and I think that's one of the beautiful things about it, that it gives it this. It adds to the obviously dreamlike, oniric atmosphere of the thing. Yeah.
And then the Blanca variations themselves were spun out.
Well, that's a piece. I did feel it had to be a piece. Yeah, it was. Yes, well, I was asked to write a piece for a piano competition, and actually thought, well, so I think I wrote that first, perhaps before anything else in the opera. I'm not quite sure about that. And it is a piece. It has a slightly different ending. Doesn't end with him saying she has a good skull. It has a sort of rather expanded coda in the solo version. But I did really want it. I think it really to give the impression that it's a real piece. I mean, it is a real piece. Mm-hmm. It's a strange one because it also something about it has a relationship to, if I were to write variations, themed variations in the real world, whatever that means. This is like a sort of prop theme of variations in a way. I mean, it's got the same relation to. Actually, I would put it like this: like say that a table, which is, you can take a prop table from a production or something, and then if you take it home, it becomes a table. Mm. So it's the same thing, but one's a prop table and one's a table. So this is a prop variations, but it's also a real piece, and it is by Adès, the real piece. But the one in the opera is the other is by Paradisi, and it's a tune that I've really started kind of this record I had as a child, made by my parents, my father's record, I think, of Sephardic songs. I sort of very much wanted to use them for error, mm-hmm. but I've always resisted it, quite consciously.
As a source?
Yes, or do something with them, I don't know, but they're so rich and interesting and varied. But that particular song has this. I just sort of knew that this was the right thing for her to play at that point. She does these variations on it, and then actually the music continues being variations on that song. There's a long passage when they say Laetitia sing and all that, and then when I think it must be. Yes, I know. It's after the scene in the closet with the Colonel and Lucia, and then from the point Nobile starts again, saying, "Oh, that went well." That's also further variations on the tune, so it sort of goes on into the texture of their evening, and it's kind of slightly the moment. That's the moment when you really start to feel, why aren't they going home?
Right.
Yeah.
Did you know when you started on that it was going to become such a virtuosic showpiece as it?
The piano piece.
Yeah.
I was so worried that they wouldn't be able to play. I mean, it's if you're an orchestral pianist to then be presented with that, it's not very fair. I mean, of course people can play it, but it simply is an enormous amount more work, practice. Right. So I thought for a long time that we'd try and play it four hands. Mm-hmm. But also sometimes I think I might have extra fingers on me, but I have very large stretch, and they always put too many notes in. And luckily Finnegan Downey Dear, who played it last night, worked very hard on it and plays it perfectly. And but she's supposed to be a great concert pianist, so it's a fairly serious piece for someone to sit down and play after dinner, but she's that sort of person, yes.
I suppose that tells you a lot about Blanca.
Yes, I think it does, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Speaking of characters having their own kind of instrumentation, literally in the case of Blanca, something that was being touched on previously was, I think you talked about this a little bit in the Royal Opera House preview, of the degree to which, for Exterminating Angel, you were aware of who was going to be singing these parts as you were writing them. And so I guess this is another trajectory question, going from the kind of limitations of Powder Her Face, just the narrowness of it. Phil Hensher was talking about how you had to go out and find Valdine Anderson, sort of.
Yes, Valdine, yes.
After the fact. I wonder if.
Well,
you
the
want to
same thing
riff on that or
happened
talk
actually
about
with the Tempest. I didn't know when I wrote the music for Ariel's part. I didn't know who was going to sing it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm afraid I just landed that one on the casting director's desk. Doorstep, and he brilliantly found Cindy Seaton. And in some cases, I mean, I had, you know, let's say, for example, Freddie Antoun, who plays Raoul. He has an absolutely classic French tenor voice, very wonderful. And so that was, you know, I knew exactly what that would sound like.
Right.
But someone like, I mean, Anne-Sophie Fonotto actually said, I think, at that event, she said this rather, I think, very true thing, which is that, you know, actually, I mean, when somebody's writing something, this is what she says, I'm quoting, so I can say it, what they're writing has its own life and its own impulsions, or is that a word? No, but sort of it's got its own drives, which really they're too strong to, unfortunately, to just obey one particular set of singers, you know,
Right.
what they can or can't, which is awful. I mean, I absolutely hold up my hand and say some of the vocal writing is absolutely frightfully awkward, and there we are. I mean, you know, it's an awkward subject.
Right. I mean, Audrey Luna said something interesting, and I think in an interview about The Tempest, is that she didn't feel all the parts that sounded hard were hard just because of where her voice was.
Well, this was a
lying.
great lesson for me. You know, she sang The Tempest with absolutely no trouble at all from beginning to end, and it's a much longer role than Letitia. It's not. I mean, it doesn't really have G's and things in it. The Tempest, I don't think, but this one does actually has an A at the start. But this one, she said she was finding it much more difficult to pace this one to do it, and it was something to do. We finally sort of sat down and worked out what it was, and it was to do with the kind of amount of time she had to stay up on long notes with not very much time to breathe. So everything was sort of going. So we worked on that and actually changed the tempo of the thing at the end of it. And so actually, it's a little bit of a more. It's also an odd thing to sing, that aria, because it oscillates very, very quickly between high sort of, you know, hysteria almost, very, very intense,
Right.
and then this sort of totally withdrawn as well. So you can do it from note to note.
And then at The Tempest, of course, the curtain falls down after one of her big arias, and so she gets a little bit of a break.
Oh yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
It strikes me also that it's not simply about like how high can Audrey Luna sing, but I can't really imagine either of these operas without Euston Davies either.
Well, Euston. Oh yes, yes.
So characteristic of the sound.
That was clear that he would be Francisco. That was a very easy one. Yes. He was going to do the whole thing with a lisp at one point, and so I think you'll find you're slightly constrained by that decision. But he still sometimes does this sort of that sort of Spanish. Yeah.
That's interesting. I was thinking that you had a couple irons in the fire at the same time between 2010 and now. You had Totin and this work, and I'm wondering, how did you feel they were sort of cross-fertilizing or on their own tracks?
No, they were very different. I don't think I was writing at the same time.
Yeah.
Totin was it was a very grateful piece to write because the text was so clear. I mean, it has such a strong direction. Mm-hmm. Whereas this one was really it really did feel like wandering in a sort of vast, endless labyrinth with no way out at one point. And of course, that's what it is. But it did feel like it for several years. It was quite a strange experience. It was nice doing the second draft, actually, because I thought, right, I know I've made the map of it somehow. Much of the first draft was virtually just sort of, you know, it would be more in this vein, but just to get a sense of some kind of shape. But I don't think there's any relation, particularly between the two pieces that I can see. They're different worlds, I think. I don't know, but I mean, this is how it feels to me. That they're as different as different people to me.
Yeah, more about kind of the topos of them, really, just in the idea of them both being about the inescapability of certain things.
I suppose.
But-
I don't know. I think the Exterminating Angel is about something else. There are a few references. Obviously, there are references to death and people die. But the lovers who decide they'd rather kill themselves than it's this very weird thing that Russell says. I'm so happy I won't see the extermination. And then he dies.
Mm-hmm.
So he is exterminated. But then, obviously, the extermination, whatever that is, which we never really know, is worse than death. That's the thing.
Right.
That's what been well. So there's a kind of paradox in it there. Whereas I think Totin is rather a kind of almost a chocolatey piece at the end. So.
Chocolatey.
Yes. You know, I mean, it is. Yes, it's a sort of. It's what's that? Yes, it's the sort of come sweet death or something. Is that something?
Sure, yeah. I mean, well, the child comes out and it has this
Yes.
very strong.
Yes. There's a kind of nice, comforting sense of the inescapability of it. Where I think the Exterminating Angel is firmly something that remains more and more scary. It gets
Not
more.
a happy
It starts
ending, right.
scary and it gets more and more scary when we think about it.
Yeah, that's interesting to think about. Speaking of the lovers dying in the closet, well, I guess you were talking about Russell dying, but of course the lovers die as well. While I was preparing this interview, I saw that you visited Wagner's house this past year, and of course the love death
Tribschen.
of Wagner, and I said I have to ask Tom about the
In Lucerne.
Lucerne, right?
Yes.
Yes.
I happened to be in Lucerne twice in 1 year, for the first time ever. And the first time I didn't get to go there. And the second time I just had nothing else to do, so I thought, well, I'll walk to the house.
So what was the experience like while you were in the... I mean, you had finished the Salzburg production, you were gearing up for this. What was the experience of going to the house while you were there?
Oh, I mean, it's not a very interesting house. I mean, it's a lovely view. It's sort of small, I thought. I mean, for Wagner, somehow. I did. I note very much how he had chosen the best house in Lucerne. I mean, it was very, very sort of superior to. And the position is marvelous and everything. And presumably, he got someone to give it to him. I don't know. I'm not sure.
I mean,
I'm not really
he was good at that,
very
right?
expert on Wagner.
I just asked because, you've talked at length in Full of Noises about Wagner, and we're thinking about opera at this moment. And then you said something in Full of Noises that I keep circling back to about your own relationship to composers in the past. So sometimes it's the ones who are the least similar. I think your phrase was your face at the window or something. That was in reference to Stravinsky. And I guess I would be interested in, what are the faces at the window for you at the moment?
I mean, the thing that I feel about when I listen to Wagner is there's Wagner, there's the operas and there's this business that happens in the operas, and then there's this musical material, and actually, it's only because he says so that we associate that particular chord with that story. Mm-hmm. If you remove the story, actually, and the whole shape and these these vast sort of things that he does, and just look at the material in a different way as a smaller cell, I think they become, well, quite honestly, I think you could have written some quite marvellous pieces with that material. Non-opera piece, just actual works.
Yeah.
It's really coming out. It's not supposed to be insulting.
No.
But I mean, I should actually say that Liszt did write those pieces already. So, yes.
Yeah.
No, his own pieces, which is where a lot of the chords come from.
Yeah.
I think. But so face at the window. Yes. It tends to be old familiar ones a lot at the moment, but Beethoven, doing a lot of work on Beethoven at the moment,
I mean, I suppose even pulling it back from music. I mean, since you're working on you're doing an opera that's based in film and has so much collaborative dimensions. I mean, what are some artists that you're admiring at the moment, or?
Well, when I was writing, I mean, actually, to be honest, at the moment, the thing is, I suppose I am now going back out into the world as an empty shell, slightly, having done. Well, I mean, that I think that would have been more true in October. I'm now sort of working on new things. It's all kind of resurging again. But an opera does tend to take everything, out of the cupboard. When I was writing this one, I was, I think, very obsessed with Strauss, Johann Strauss. Which is an odd thing to be obsessed with in a way when you're dealing with such a subject as this. I mean, it's thought of as light music, but there's something about the circularity of Strauss waltzes that I think I clung to as a life raft. Mm-hmm. I was doing this one. Thought if I can circle back to Strauss somewhere along the line, I'll be all right. That is usually when one of the characters says, "No, I'm perfectly fine. I don't want to go home."
And then the waltz comes right back in. Well, I suppose that's not unrelated to something that I'd love to know is what's next.
What's next? I'm writing a piano concerto, and I have various other thoughts as well. I think I might be avoiding singers for a few years.
I'm not saying that.
Yes. It's best for both of us.
And I mean, the keyboard is your own.
Yes,
well,
yes.
so.
I'll probably. I hope I make it so I can play it. But
because the concert paraphrase came after something of a long hiatus for piano music for you.
Well, yeah, I couldn't work out what to do with a piano, and I literally found myself vamping something, and I thought, what I'm doing now is what Liszt would call a reminiscence of something. Uh-huh. It's odd to do a reminiscence of your own opera, I suppose, actually thinking about it. But that's what I did. And there's a new suite, actually, much bigger than the three dances, for a bigger orchestra. I put the saxophones back in. Mm-hmm. And it takes a bit, doing that paraphrase, I worked out a way, a sort of logical musical structure. So that's it. That's largely in this new suite, and there's some more new bits as well.
Because I think that's the only time you've revisited something at quite such a.
I think I'm going to start. I'm going to sort of give myself a break from I mean, it really needs the words, doesn't it? That's the thing.